That morning, no one expected a single act of defiance to change military history. What began as routine training became a moment every soldier on base would remember, and one that would test the difference between following orders and doing what's right. The sun crested the horizon over Fort Bragg, casting long shadows across the dew-kissed parade ground. Sergeant Elena Vasquez stood at attention, her boots planted firmly in the damp grass, the faint scent of pine and earth rising from the North Carolina soil. At her side, her K9 partner, Rex, a sleek German shepherd with a coat the color of polished walnut, sat rigid, his ears pricked forward. The air hummed with the low murmur of assembling troops, boots scraping against gravel, the metallic click of gear being adjusted, and the distant bark of commands echoing from the barracks. "Platoon, fall in!" Captain Harlan's voice cut through the morning chill like a knife. He was a broad-shouldered veteran, his face etched with the lines of too many deployments, his uniform starched to perfection. Elena's unit, the 82nd Airborne Specialized K9 Detection Team, formed up in precise rows. They were handlers, trainers, and guardians of the unseen threats, explosives, narcotics, and the subtle dangers that could unravel a mission before it began. Elena, at 29, was one of the few women in the ranks. Her dark hair pulled into a tight bun beneath her patrol cap, her eyes scanning the formation with the quiet focus she'd honed over 8 years. Rex shifted slightly, his nose twitching as he caught the faint whiff of the handler's coffee thermoses lining the edge of the field. Elena placed a steady hand on his harness, a silent reassurance. Their bond was forged in the quiet hours of night patrols and the relentless rhythm of training exercises. Rex wasn't just a dog, he was her extension, her instinct made manifest. In the field, he detected IEDs in the Afghan dust and contraband in shipping containers at ports. Here, in the controlled chaos of base life, he was her anchor amid the rigid hierarchy. The training schedule was standard. Water source integrity drills, simulating contamination in forward operating bases. The team would rotate through mock scenarios, testing purification systems and detection protocols. Captain Harlan paced the front, his clipboard tucked under one arm. This morning's objective: identify and isolate tainted resources under simulated combat stress. Handlers, your K9s are the first line. No deviations. We follow procedure to the letter. Elena nodded along with the others, her gloved hand absently stroking Rex's flank. The dog leaned into her touch, his breathing even, betraying none of the alertness that simmered beneath. Beside her, Corporal Tate, a wiry handler with a perpetual squint, muttered under his breath to his own dog, a Belgian Malinois named Shadow. Tate had joined the unit 6 months prior, fresh from basic, and carried the eagerness of a newcomer, sometimes too much. "Easy, boy," he said, clipping a lead to Shadow's collar. As the platoon broke into smaller groups, the medics from the adjacent support unit arrived with their kits. Routine protocol, pre-training health checks for the dogs, including mild sedatives if needed to keep them calm during equipment familiarization. Dr. Ellis, the base veterinarian, a middle-aged man with wire-rimmed glasses and a no-nonsense demeanor, approached Elena's position first. He carried a syringe in a sterile case, the needle glinting in the early light. "Sergeant Vasquez," Ellis said, his voice clipped and professional. "Rex due for his standard dose. Keeps him steady for the water sims." Elena hesitated, her gaze dropping to Rex. The dog looked up at her, his brown eyes steady, tail giving a single measured wag. Sedatives were standard for high-stress drills, but Rex had never needed them. His senses were too sharp, his responses too intuitive. "He's fine, Doc. No signs of agitation." Ellis frowned, consulting his chart. "Protocol, Sergeant. Captain's orders. All K9s prepped uniformly. We can't risk variables in the field simulation." Around them, the other handlers complied without question. Tate administered the shot to Shadow, who barely flinched, settling into a drowsy sit. The air filled with the soft whir of radios as teams coordinated, the scent of antiseptic mingling with the earthy dampness. Elena felt the weight of eyes on her. Captain Harlan glancing over from across the field, his jaw set. Defiance here wasn't just personal. It rippled through the chain of command, a crack in the discipline that held them all together. Rex whined softly, his nose lifting toward the line of water barrels set up for the drill. They were standard issue, filled from the base's main supply the night before, marked with hazard tape for the exercise. But something in the dog's posture shifted, his hackles rising imperceptibly, a low rumble building in his throat. Elena's pulse quickened. She'd seen that look before, in the dim glow of night vision goggles, when Rex had frozen before a hidden cache. "Stand down, Sergeant," Ellis pressed, syringe extended. "This isn't a debate." The moment stretched, the parade ground holding its breath. Elena's hand tightened on Rex's lead. Duty demanded compliance, the orders were clear, etched into every briefing. But conscience whispered through the silence, the unspoken trust between her and Rex, the life they'd built in the shadows of obedience. She met Ellis's eyes, her voice steady. "With respect, Doctor, Rex doesn't need it. And if he senses something off, we trust that first." Harlan's boots crunched closer, the weight of authority descending. The training was about to begin. But the real test had already started, not in the water barrels, but in the choice Elena faced right there, under the watchful gaze of her unit. Rex's nose worked the air again, insistent now, pulling toward the barrels. A faint, acrid tang lingered on the breeze, unnoticed by the humans, but unmistakable to him. Elena's mind raced, protocol or instinct. The line blurred as the captain arrived, his shadow falling over them both. "Sergeant Vasquez," Harlan said, his tone even but edged with steel. "Explain the holdup." She straightened, saluting crisply. "Sir, Rex is alerting. To the water, sir." The captain's brow furrowed, glancing at the barrels. "It's simulated, Sergeant, part of the drill. Administer the sedative and proceed." But Rex strained against the lead, his growl deepening, eyes fixed on the source. Elena felt the tremor in her hand, the moral tension coiling like a spring. Obey, and risk dulling the very sense that might save them all. Defy, and invite the reckoning of the ranks. In that suspended instant, with the sun climbing higher and the unit waiting, Elena made her choice. She stepped forward, unclipping Rex's lead just enough to let him advance. "Rex, search." The dog moved with purposeful grace, nose to the ground, weaving toward the first barrel. The handlers watched in stunned silence, the radio chatter fading to static. Ellis lowered the syringe, his face paling as Rex pawed at the base of the container, barking sharply, a sound that cut through the morning like an alarm. Harlan's radio crackled to life. "Control to Alpha Team. Confirm water source status." "Negative," the captain replied, his voice tight. "Possible anomaly. Stand by." Eleanor knelt beside Rex, her heart pounding against her ribs. The dog's alert wasn't part of the script. As she uncapped the barrel under Harlan's watchful eye, a faint, unnatural shimmer coated the surface. Not the simulated dye, but something real, insidious, poison, hidden in plain sight, threatening the entire base. The defiance that began with a single refusal now echoed across the field, drawing every eye. What had been routine shattered, revealing a threat none had anticipated. And in the quiet that followed Rex's bark, Eleanor knew this was no longer just training. It was the start of something that would test the soul of their unit. The clamor of boots on gravel broke the stunned hush as the unit converged on the water barrels. Captain Harlan knelt beside Elena, his gloved fingers dipping cautiously into the shallow sample she'd poured onto a testing mat. The liquid gleamed unnaturally under the rising sun. oily iridescence that caught the light like a warning flare. Rex paced at Elena's side, his flanks heaving from the intensity of the alert, wet nose brushing her knee in a silent affirmation of their shared vigilance. "Secure the area," Harlan barked into his radio, his voice steady but laced with the undercurrent of command under fire. "All personnel, stand clear of the supply line. Notify base command, possible contamination." Elena rose slowly, her patrol cap casting a shadow over her face as she scanned the handlers. Corporal Tate stood frozen, shadow's lead slack in his hand. The Malinois' ears perked in echo of Rex's earlier rumble. Dr. Ellis had retreated a step, the syringe still clutched like a forgotten relic, his glasses fogging slightly in the warming air. The scent of the exposed chemical hung faint but persistent, bitter, like overripe almonds mixed with rust, stirring a low whine from Rex as he pressed closer to Elena. "Sergeant Vasquez," Harlan said, standing and meeting her gaze. His eyes, sharp beneath furrowed brows, held no recrimination yet, only the cold assessment of a leader recalibrating. "Walk me through it, from the sedative refusal." She saluted crisply, her posture unyielding despite the adrenaline threading her veins. "Sir," Rex showed no need for sedation. Standard for him, his thresholds are calibrated without it. But as we approached, he alerted independently. Nose to the barrels, vocalization clear. "I authorized the search per K9 protocol." Harlan nodded once, glancing at Ellis. "Doc, your read." The veterinarian cleared his throat, pocketing the syringe with deliberate care. "Protocol was for uniformity, Captain. No signs of distress in Rex pre-check. If anything, he was hyper-alert. But this—" He gestured to the mat, where the sample was already being swabbed by arriving medic tech. "This isn't simulant. Preliminary sniff could be organophosphate, nerve agent traces." The words rippled through the group like a shockwave, radios crackling with confirmations from the perimeter. Eleanor felt the weight of it settle in her chest, the moral calculus shifting from personal defiance to institutional peril. She'd chosen instinct over order, Rex over the chain, and now the base's water supply, piped from the central reservoir to these training props, hung in the balance. How had it gotten there? Sabotage? Error in purification? The questions coiled tight, unspoken, as a Humvee rolled up, disgorging the base's chemical response team in their sealed suits. "Evacuate non-essentials," the lead tech called, her voice muffled through her mask. "Full lockdown on Sector 3 intakes." Elena clipped Rex's lead shorter, guiding him back as the team swarmed the barrels. The dog's tail was low, his body language a mirror of her tension, alert but contained, ready for the next command. Their bond, forged in the repetitive cadence of drills and the silent nights of base patrols, felt like the only steady thing amid the unfolding chaos. She'd trained him herself, from puppy commands in the kennels to advanced scent discrimination under simulated fire. Rex didn't question. He trusted her cues, and in return, she honored his senses. That trust had just averted disaster, or exposed one. Harlan pulled her aside, his hand firm on her shoulder, steering her toward the command tent at the field's edge. The canvas flaps rustled in the breeze, carrying the faint tang of diesel from idling vehicles. Inside, the air was cooler, shadowed by maps pinned to folding tables and the hum of a field radio tuned to emergency frequencies. "Sit rep," he said, pouring black coffee from a thermos into 2 battered mugs. The steam rose in lazy curls, grounding the moment in routine, even as alarms blared faintly outside. Elena accepted the mug, her fingers wrapping around its warmth. "Sir, Rex's alert was textbook. No hesitation. If we'd sedated him, we might not have caught it in time." Harlan cut in, his tone measured, eyes on the tent flap where shadows of techs moved like ghosts. "But protocol exists for a reason, Sergeant. Uniformity saves lives in the field. Your call." It was borderline insubordination. She met his stare, the coffee bitter on her tongue. With respect, sir. K9 protocol prioritizes handler judgment on alerts. Sedation dulls response time. Rex sensed it before any human cue. He leaned back, the chair creaking under his frame. The tent smelled of stale briefings and oiled leather, a sanctuary of order now pierced by uncertainty. Harlan had mentored her early in the unit, praising her precision during a joint exercise with Delta. But hierarchy demanded accountability, and Elena knew the ripples, reports to Colonel, potential reprimand, questions about her readiness. Outside, the response team's voices filtered through, clipped orders, the hiss of sampling pumps drawing from the pipes. Rex lay at her feet, head on paws, his breathing a soft rhythm that anchored her. The dog's loyalty was absolute, unmarred by rank or repercussion. In that, Elena found her resolve. Sir, if this is contamination, we need to trace the source. Rex can help. Scent line from reservoir to here. Harlan considered, rubbing his jaw where stubble shadowed the skin. Agreed. But first we contain. Base commands en route. They'll want statements, yours included. The tent flap parted, admitting Colonel Reyes, a wiry officer with silver at his temples and a tablet underarm. His uniform was impeccable, boots polished to a gleam despite the haste. "Captain! Sergeant! Walk me in!" Harlan briefed succinctly, the drill setup, the sedative standoff, Rex's alert, the initial chem read. Reyes listened, his expression a mask of disciplined focus, nodding at the mention of the sample's anomaly. When he turned to Elena, his eyes appraised her like a field asset, capable but tested. "Vasquez," he said, voice even, "your dog's intervention is noted, but explain the deviation from medical protocol. We can't have handlers freelancing in critical ops." She stood saluting. "Sir, Rex's baseline doesn't require sedation for these evolutions. His alert was independent, preceded any human intervention. Delaying could have compromised detection." Reyes tapped his tablet, pulling up the unit's K9 logs. The screen glowed softly, casting blue light on his face. "Logs confirm your calibration, but orders were explicit. This could set precedent, undermine cohesion." Elena felt the tension coil deeper, the cost of integrity pressing like the humid air. Obedience built the machine, conscience oiled its conscience. Rex stirred, sensing her shift, his nose nudging her boot. Outside, the lockdown sirens wound down, replaced by the steady thump of a Black Hawk lifting off for aerial recon, standard for perimeter sweeps. "Understood, sir," she replied, her voice level. "But if Rex hadn't alerted, we'd be distributing tainted water across 3 sectors. Protocol saved us, but instinct found the breach." Reyes paused, then nodded. "Point taken. For now, you and Rex assist the trace team. Captain, coordinate with Intel. Check access logs to the reservoir. This smells like more than accident." As they exited the tent, the sun beat down fully now, turning the field into a haze of heat and activity. Techs in hazmat gear sealed the barrels, their movements precise, radios buzzing with containment updates. Elena knelt to Rex, running a gloved hand along his ears. "Good boy," she murmured, the words a private vow amid the public scrutiny. The unit watched as she and Rex moved to the pipeline, the dog's nose already questing along the buried conduit markers. Whispers followed, admiration from some handlers, doubt from others like Tate, who lingered at the edge, shadow at heel. The moral test had escalated, not just her choice, but the institution's response. Would they credit the bond that detected the poison, or punish the defiance that enabled it? Harlan fell in beside her, his presence a silent endorsement. "Keep him sharp, Sergeant, this just got real." As Rex pulled toward the reservoir path, the acrid scent trail strengthening, Eleanor straightened. The quiet breath before the next order carried the weight of legacies. Hers, Rex's, the unit's. In the rigid lines of command, a single thread of trust could unravel or reinforce the whole. And as the investigation deepened, she braced for the scrutiny that would follow. The path to the reservoir wound through a chain-link perimeter, the gravel crunching under Elena's boots like brittle bones. Rex led the way, his lead taut in her grip, nose skimming inches above the ground as he followed the invisible thread of contamination. The midday sun filtered through the pine canopy, dappling the earth in shifting patterns, while the distant thrum of the Blackhawk faded into the steady buzz of cicadas. Elena's uniform clung damply to her skin, the heat a persistent pressure that mirrored the knot in her chest. Harlan walked a pace behind, his radio clipped to his shoulder, crackling with intermittent updates from the response team. Samples en route to the lab. No secondary alerts in the barracks lines yet. "Steady, Rex," she murmured, her voice low and even, a command wrapped in reassurance. The dog's ears flicked back at the sound, his pace unerring as he veered toward a maintenance access panel half buried in the underbrush. The air here carried a sharper edge to the chemical tang, laced with the metallic bite of rust from the pipes snaking underground. Elena knelt, gloved fingers probing the panel's lock, standard padlock, unchained, but the hasp showed fresh scratches, faint glints of tool marks catching the light. Harlan crouched beside her, his breath controlled, eyes narrowing on the evidence. Tamper marks, not weatherwear. He keyed his radio. "Control. This is Harlan. Trace team at sector access point. Signs of forced entry. Request forensics on site." The response came clipped. "Affirmative. ETA 5 mics. Maintain perimeter." Elena unclipped a small toolkit from her belt, the clink of metal soft against the quiet. Rex sat alert, his gaze fixed on the panel, a low rumble vibrating through his chest. She worked the lock with practiced efficiency. Protocol for K9 handlers included basic breach response, and the panel swung open with a groan of hinges. Inside, the pipe junction gleamed dully, a valve slightly ajar, droplets of residue beading on the flange like dew on a spiderweb. Rex lunged forward, sniffing deeply, his bark sharp and insistent. "Positive hit," Elena reported, steadying him as she swabbed the area with a chem strip from her pouch. The paper bloomed a vivid crimson, confirmation of the organophosphate traces. Her pulse steadied into the rhythm of the job. Assess, document, contain. But beneath it, the moral weight pressed harder. This wasn't a training glitch. It was deliberate, a breach that could have felled an entire platoon before chow call. Her refusal of the sedative had bought them time. But now the chain of command would dissect every second, every choice. They sealed the panel with hazard tape from Harlan's pack, the adhesive whispering as it stuck. As they rose, the forensics van rumbled up the path, tires kicking dust that settled on Rex's coat like fine ash. The team spilled out, 2 techs in coveralls, carrying scanners and sample kits, their faces set in the focused anonymity of procedure. Leading them was Specialist Kerr, a lanky analyst with a tablet slung at his hip, his boots scuffed from countless site sweeps. "Captain?" Kerr nodded to Harlan, then to Elena. "Heard your K9's the star today. Show us the line." Elena guided them back along the trace, Rex pulling eagerly, his paws padding silently over roots and leaf litter. The group moved in loose formation, radios murmuring coordinates, the scent of pine resin mixing with the faint ozone from the scanners humming to life. At the reservoir's edge, a squat concrete basin ringed by razor wire, the dog's alert intensified. He pawed at a service ladder descending into the shadowed water, his whines escalating to barks that echoed off the surface. Kerr deployed a probe, the device dipping into the intake with a soft plunk. Readings flickered on his tablet. Elevated pH, anomalous particulates. "Contaminants introduced upstream," he said, voice matter-of-fact. "Not dispersal, targeted injection. Valve seals bypassed here." Harlan's jaw tightened, the lines around his mouth deepening. "Access logs. Who had clearance last night?" "Maintenance crew. Routine check at 2200, Kerr replied, scrolling. "Logged out clean, but footage from the gate cam. Glitch at 0200, blackout for 12 minutes. Elena felt the chill despite the heat, her hand absently stroking Rex's head as he settled beside her. The dog leaned into the touch, his warmth a grounding force amid the unfolding implications. Sabotage on base wasn't unheard of. Disgruntled contractor, ideological fringe, but in the 80-second secure sector, it struck at the core of their world. Her mind replayed the morning, Ellis's syringe, Harlan's orders, the unit's eyes on her defiance. If she'd complied, Rex sedated and sidelined. The poison might have cycled through the system undetected, symptoms hitting handlers first. Blurred vision, convulsions, the slow unraveling of a team. Colonel Reyes arrived as the techs cordoned the site, his Humvee pulling up with a gravel skid. He stepped out, tablet in hand, the silver eagles on his collar catching the sun. "Progress?" Harlan briefed him succinctly. The trace, the tamper marks, the injection point. Reyes listened, his posture ramrod straight, then turned to Elena. "Sergeant, your input on the K-9's role." "Sir," she said, saluting, "Rex isolated the vector from 50 meters out. No human cues, pure scent discrimination. He's trained for low-concentration volatiles. Sedation would have muted that window." Reyes nodded, but his eyes held the scrutiny of command. "Noted, but your initial holdout, it's in the report. Handlers don't override medical without flag-up. This saves face now, but it exposes cracks." The words landed like a formal reprimand, restrained but pointed. Eleanor held his gaze, her voice level. "Understood, sir. Cracks let threats in. Rex closed one today." A murmur rippled from the perimeter, where handlers had gathered under guard, protocol lockdown keeping them clear, but close. Tate stood among them, shadow at his side, his face a mix of awe and unease. Whispers carried on the breeze. She called it, from one. But orders are orders, from another. The public reckoning was brewing, the unit's cohesion tested not just by the poison, but by the handler who bent the rules to expose it. Reyes conferred with Kerr, then addressed the group. "Full sweep authorized. Vasquez, your team leads the scent line to the main intake. Captain, intel brief in 1 hour, suspect profiles." As the colonel departed, Harlan clapped Elena's shoulder, a rare gesture of solidarity. "You bought us the lead, Sergeant. But watch your six. The brass will circle this." She nodded, clipping fresh swabs to Rex's harness for the extended trace. The dog rose, ready, his eyes meeting hers in that silent pact. The reservoir's water lapped gently below, a deceptive calm hiding the peril they'd uncovered. Elena's conscience tugged. Duty had demanded obedience, but morality had demanded action. Now, with the investigation's eyes on her, the cost sharpened. Commendation or court-martial, trust earned, or loyalty questioned. They pressed on toward the main pipes, Rex's nose questing deeper into the undergrowth. The afternoon light slanted low, casting long shadows that mirrored the doubts creeping through the ranks. In the rigid framework of military life, one dog's instinct had pierced the veil, but the human fallout loomed larger, a test of whether integrity would reinforce the chain or snap it. Back at the command post as samples shuttled to the lab, Elena overheard the first ripples. Ellis defending protocol in a side call, Tate vouching for her in hushed tones to appear. The moral tension coiled tighter, the unit fracturing along lines of obedience and instinct. Rex paused at a junction box, alerting again, and Elena knelt to investigate. Another subtle breach, the poison's trail weaving like a hidden fault line. Harlan radioed confirmation. Intel's pulling logs, possible insider, maintenance shift overlap. Elena's grip tightened on the lead. The defiance that started the morning now fueled the hunt, but scrutiny from above pressed like the humid air. Would the institution honor the save or penalize the method? As Rex pulled forward, the path ahead darkened with uncertainty. The quiet breath of the team holding for what came next. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far stories of courage and integrity can reach. The forensics team's floodlights pierced the gathering dusk over the reservoir perimeter, casting stark pools of white against the encroaching shadows. Elena stood at the edge of the cordoned area. Rex's lead looped loosely in her gloved hand. The dog's body heat a faint comfort against her leg. The air had cooled, carrying the sharp bite of decontaminant sprays mingling with the earthy dampness rising from the ground. Techs in sealed suits moved methodically, their scanners beeping in rhythmic pulses as they mapped the injection site's residue. Voices muffled through respirators in clipped exchanges of measurements and chain-of-custody logs. Harlan paced nearby, his boots scuffing the gravel path. Radio pressed to his ear as he relayed updates to base command. Affirmative on the valve bypass. No prints yet, gloves likely. Expanding search radius to the access road. He glanced at Elena, his expression a mask of controlled strain. The lines of his face deepened by the fading light. The morning's routine had fractured into this. A full-scale breach investigation, with Elena's defiance at its epicenter. Whispers from the gathered handlers had evolved into sidelong stares, the unit's cohesion fraying under the weight of uncertainty. Colonel Reyes emerged from the command tent, his silhouette sharp against the canvas glow, tablet clutched like a shield. He approached with measured steps, the faint jingle of his dog tags, the only sound breaking the hum of equipment. "Sergeant Vasquez," he said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had navigated worse crises but none so personal to his ranks. "Join me. We need your full account. On record." Elena saluted, her posture snapping to attention, despite the ache in her shoulders from hours on the trace. Rex rose with her, his ears perked, sensing the shift in tone. They followed Reyes into the tent, where a folding table held a digital recorder, its red light blinking steadily. The space smelled of instant coffee and printer ink. The maps on the walls annotated with red markers tracing the pipe network like veins exposed. "Sit," Reyes directed, gesturing to a metal chair. Harlan took position by the flap, a silent observer. Elena settled, Rex curling at her feet, his nose twitching toward the recorder as if assessing its own threat. The colonel activated the device, stating the time, date, and personnel for the log. "This is preliminary inquiry into the contamination incident Sector 3. Sergeant, begin with the pre-training check, every detail." She recounted it methodically. The assembly on the parade ground, the dew underfoot, Rex's steady sit amid the assembling gear, the approach of Dr. Ellis, syringe in hand, the faint antiseptic whiff cutting through the pine-scented air. "Protocol called for sedation, sir." Rex showed no agitation. Baseline heart rate normal, responses sharp. I deferred based on his calibration logs, which prioritize unenhanced detection in SIMS. Reyes leaned forward, elbows on the table, the tablet screen reflecting in his eyes. "And the alert? Timing?" "Concurrent, sir." As Ellis pressed, Rex fixated on the barrels. Nose up, hackles subtle, then vocalization. "I authorize search per handler discretion, K9 manual, section 4.2. The colonel tapped the screen, pulling up the manual's digital copy. Silence stretched, broken only by Rex's soft breathing and the distant crackle of radios outside. "Discretion has limits, Sergeant. Captain Harlan's orders were uniform prep. Your refusal created a delay. Handlers diverted. Focus split." Elena's jaw tightened, but her voice remained even, honed by years of briefings. "Respectfully, sir, the delay exposed the anomaly. Sedation onset is 15 minutes. Rex's window closed that. If we'd proceeded blind, distribution hits at 900, full platoon exposure." Reyes nodded, But the scrutiny lingered, his fingers drumming a restrained rhythm on the table. Outside, the unit's murmur grew. Medics briefing on potential symptoms, handlers securing their own K9s in the kennels, the clatter of leashes and low commands filtering through the canvas. Tate's voice carried faintly, defending her to a cluster of peers. She trusted the dog, saved our asses. But counterpoints followed, laced with resentment. Rules keep us alive. Now we're all under the microscope. The tent flap rustled as Specialist Kerr entered, coveralls dusted with soil, holding a sealed evidence bag. Colonel, partial print lift from the panel hasp, smudged, but running it now, and the glitch on gate cam. Timestamp matches a maintenance truck, logged out early, driver unaccounted. Reyes absorbed it, then turned back to Elena. This escalates. Sabotage implies intent, targeted at the unit. Your role puts you in the line for commendation. Or deeper review. Why no prior flag on Rex's exemption? She met his gaze steadily, the weight of the question pressing like the humid night air seeping in. Sir, exemptions are unit approved. Captain Harlan signed off last quarter. Rex's record, 98% efficacy unsedated. It's not freelancing, it's optimization. Harlan shifted, interjecting quietly. She's right, sir. I've reviewed the logs. Vasquez's judgment aligns with field doctrine. The colonel paused the recorder, rubbing his temple, where fatigue etched faint lines. Appreciated, Captain, but the chain demands accountability. This breach, poison in the lines, could trace to oversight. Your oversight included. He reactivated it, continuing the inquiry with questions on the trace. Rex's path, the alerts at junctions, the crimson chem strips blooming under her hands. As Elena detailed the dog's unerring pull through the underbrush, the rustle of leaves, the acrid intensification, Rex stirred, whining softly, his paw tapping her boot. The sound drew Reyes's eye, a flicker of respect softening his features. Your partner's proven today, but protocol binds us all. One loose thread, and the whole fabric unravels. The session wrapped at 2,000 hours, the recorder clicking off as Elena saluted and exited with Rex. The night had fully settled, stars pricking the sky above the floodlit perimeter, the air alive with the whir of generators and the low rumble of departing tech vans. Handlers lingered in small groups, faces illuminated by phone screens, checking news feeds, base lockdown whispers already leaking to external channels. The incident's visibility swelling beyond the wire. Tate approached as she headed to the kennels, Shadow trailing obediently. Sergeant, that in there? Reyes grilling you? Handlers are talking. Some say you bent rules. Others, you're the reason we're not in the infirmary. Elena nodded, her hand on Rex's head, feeling the dog's steady pulse. Talk's cheap, Corporal. Focus on your sweep assignments. This isn't over. He saluted, but his eyes held a mix of solidarity and doubt, mirroring the unit's fracture. In the kennel block, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows on the concrete floors, slick with recent hosing. Rex settled into his run, nose nudging her fingers through the gate, a silent anchor amid the storm. Elena lingered, reviewing her log on a handheld device. The screen's glow highlighting the day's entries. Alert confirmed, trace initiated, inquiry pending. Back in her quarters, the small room smelled of polished boots and laundered fatigues, the single bulb casting a warm halo over her bunk. She replayed the interrogation, the moral tension coiling anew, duty's rigid lines versus the instinct that had pierced them. Reyes's words echoed, cracks exposed. But Rex's save rippled outward, forcing the institution to confront its blind spots. As she lay down, the distant hum of patrols lulling her, Elena braced for the tribunal's shadow. The public eyes of the base of the army now turned her way, weighing defiance against deliverance. Dawn would bring lab confirmations, organophosphate, industrial grade, enough to incapacitate a battalion. And with it, the reckoning deepened, suspects narrowing, loyalties tested, her choice a fulcrum tipping the scales toward reform or rebuke. In the quiet, Rex's distant bark from the kennels carried through the night, a reminder that some bonds outlasted the chain. The base's morning revel pierced the thin walls of Elena's quarters like a distant clarion, pulling her from a restless sleep. She rose methodically, folding her blanket with crisp corners, the faint scent of bleach from the linens grounding her in routine. Outside, the North Carolina mist clung to the ground, muting the crunch of boots as the unit stirred under lockdown protocols. Rex's bark echoed from the kennels, a sharp, insistent call that tugged at her like an unspoken summons. She dressed in fresh fatigues, the fabric stiff against her skin, and headed out, the cool air carrying the tang of dew-soaked pine and the underlying sharpness of decontaminant residue from the night before. At the kennel block, Specialist Kerr waited by the gate, his tablet holstered at his belt, face shadowed under the brim of his cap. "Sergeant, lab prelims came in at 400, confirmed organophosphate, sarin precursor variant, lethal in concentrations we had. Your trace team's credited with the upstream block." His tone was neutral, procedural, but his eyes held a flicker of deference. The kind earned in crisis rather than rank. Elena nodded, clipping Rex's lead as the dog bounded to her side, his wet nose brushing her hand in greeting. The kennel's concrete floors gleamed under the overhead lights, the air heavy with the musky warmth of the animals and the faint metallic whiff of cleaning agents. "Any leads on the injection?" Kerr glanced at his tablet, scrolling. "Driver from that maintenance truck. Civilian contractor cleared last week, vanished after shift. Intel's pulling his file, but the brass wants you at Central HQ for the full board. Eero 900 sharp." The word settled like lead in her gut, the moral tension from yesterday's inquiry now crystallizing into formal scrutiny. She led Rex out, the dog's paws padding softly beside her, his posture alert as they navigated the secured paths lined with razor wire and patrolling MPs. The base felt constricted, checkpoints manned by stone-faced sentries, radios humming with restricted chatter. Handlers nodded as she passed, some with quick salutes, others averting their eyes, the unit's fracture visible in those subtle gestures, loyalty divided between protocol and the save. Central HQ loomed at the compound's heart, a squat brick building flanked by flagpoles where the stars and stripes snapped in the breeze. Inside, the air was cooler, conditioned and sterile, smelling of polished oak and fresh-brewed coffee from the adjacent mess. Colonel Reyes stood at the head of a conference room table, maps and chem charts projected on the wall behind him, glowing lines tracing the pipe network like exposed nerves. Flanking him were Major Ellis, now in dress blues, his veterinarian insignia pinned neatly, and Captain Harlan, who met Eleanor's gaze with a nod that conveyed quiet support. A stenographer sat in the corner, recorder whirring softly, while two JAG officers observed from the side, their notebooks open. "Sergeant Vasquez," Reyes began, his voice echoing slightly off the panelled walls. "At ease, this is the Article 15 preliminary board, non-judicial but on record. Your actions yesterday warrant review. Deviation from medical orders, potential impact on unit readiness." Elena stood at attention, Rex sitting rigidly at her heel, his ears forward as if attuned to the room's undercurrents. She saluted, then reported as ordered. Her voice steady through the recap, the parade ground assembly, Ellis's approach, Rex's alert pulling her from compliance. The room listened in silence, the only sounds the scratch of pens and the faint tick of a wall clock. Harlan interjected once, confirming her logs. "Rex's efficacy unsedated is documented, sir. No prior incidents." Ellis shifted, his wire-rimmed glasses catching the light. With respect, Captain, uniformity prevents variables. Sedation ensures baseline calm, critical in simulations mirroring combat stress. Vasquez's refusal delayed the team by 4 minutes, diverting focus. The Major's words hung, a direct challenge that stirred the air like static before a storm. Elena felt the weight of it, the ethical dilemma sharpening. Her bond with Rex, forged in countless quiet hours of scent work and trust-building, pitted against the institution's unyielding structure. Obedience built the ranks. Instinct had pierced the threat. But here, under the board's gaze, defiance risked her career, her place in the chain. Reyes turned to the JAG officers, one a stern woman with salt and pepper hair, her uniform adorned with ribbons from deployments Elena recognized. "Counselor, your read." The officer leaned forward, eyes on Elena. "Protocol breach is clear. FM 319. 4 mandates compliance with veterinary directives in K9 ops." But the outcome, the alert prevented exposure, precedent from the 2012 Ballad incident, handler discretion upheld when it averts casualties. She paused, glancing at Rex, who met her stare without flinching. "The dog's role complicates. Recommend commendation contingent on full disclosure." Murmurs rippled from the observers, the room's tension coiling as Reyes conferred quietly with Ellis. Outside, through the half-open blinds, Elena caught glimpses of the courtyard, handlers drilling under supervision, their K9s working obedience patterns, leashes taut in the mist. Tate was there, shadow weaving through cones, his glance toward the window brief but loaded with the unit's collective breath held. The colonel reconvened the board, his tone measured. "Sergeant, your judgment saved lives. That's uncontested, but the method invites questions. Effective immediately, you're on restricted duty. Assist intel on the sabotage trace. Under Captain Harlan's oversight, no solo decisions. The contractor's file shows anomalies, prior psych eval, access to chem stores. Your input could narrow it." Elena saluted, the relief tempered by the reprimand's sting. "Understood, sir. Rex and I are ready." As the board adjourned, Harlan pulled her aside in the hallway, the echo of footsteps fading behind them. The corridor smelled of waxed floors and faint ozone from the HVAC, a sterile vein through the building's heart. "You walked the line clean, Elena, but eyes are on you now. Media's sniffing at the gates, calling it a base scare. Brass wants it contained." She nodded, Rex pressing against her leg, his warmth cutting through the chill. The public reckoning had breached the wire. Whispers turning to reports, her defiance no longer confined to the unit. In the intel office adjacent, screens flickered with CCTV stills. The maintenance truck's taillights vanishing into night, the driver's blurred silhouette. Elena sat at a terminal, Rex curling under the desk, as analysts fed her the scent profile. Industrial solvent masking the organophosphate. A trail Rex could follow if they released him on the access road. Hours blurred into methodology, mapping the contractor's route, cross-referencing shift logs, the room's air thickening with coffee steam and the low hum of printers. Tate reported in mid-afternoon, shadow in tow, his face earnest. "Sergeant, unit's solid behind you." Doc Ellis even admitted in the mess. Rex's nose beat the Sims. The words carried the subtle shift, resentment yielding to respect, the fracture mending through shared vulnerability. By evening, as the mist burned off under a setting sun, Elena and Rex took the field for a controlled trace simulation, Harlan overseeing from the sidelines, his radio linking to intel. The dog worked the gravel path, nose questing the phantom line, his alerts precise. Unmarred by yesterday's shadow, Elena felt the bond deepen in the discipline, Rex's trust a quiet rebellion against the scrutiny. The institution's response rippled outward, memos circulating on K9 exemptions, Reyes pushing for revised protocols that honored handler instinct without unraveling order. In the quiet aftermath, as they returned to quarters, the base's lights flickered on one by one, casting golden pools on the paths. Elena paused at the kennel gate, kneeling to Rex's level, her hand tracing the line of his jaw. "We held the line, boy." His eyes met hers, steady in the dusk, a symbol of the loyalty that had tested and begun to transform the rigid world around them. The sabotage hunt pressed on, suspects closing in, but the moral victory lingered. Conscience, once defiant, now weaving into the chain's fabric, promising reform in the wake of peril. The intel office thrummed with the low pulse of fluorescent lights and cooling fans from the array of monitors lining the walls. Elena sat at a scarred metal desk, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as she cross-referenced the contractor's file against base access records. Rex lay curled beneath the table, his flanks rising and falling in even rhythm, the faint scent of his damp fur mingling with the stale coffee permeating the room. Outside the reinforced windows, the evening patrol lights swept the perimeter in slow arcs, casting fleeting shadows across the concrete yard where MPs stood sentinel, rifles slung low. Captain Harlan leaned against the adjacent console, his arms crossed over his chest, the fabric of his uniform whispering with the movement. "Files got holes, Sergeant. Guy's name, Marcus Hale. Hired on 3 months back for plumbing upgrades. Psych eval flagged resentment toward military contracts, but cleared for low risk. Last ping, his truck dumped off base, keys in the ignition at 400 yesterday." Elena nodded, her eyes tracing the grainy CCTV stills on her screen. The blurred figure slipping from the shadows near the reservoir gate, a duffel slung over one shoulder. The image quality was poor, washed out by night vision filters, but the posture screamed intent. Hunched, deliberate, avoiding the camera's sweep. Rex could match the scent if we pull residue from the truck. Handler protocol allows it for active threats. Harlan's radio crackled softly, a dispatcher's voice confirming the vehicle's forensics sweep. "Approved, but keep it tight. Reyes is briefing the general at 2200. Your board's outcome hangs on this trace closing the loop." His tone carried the weight of mentorship, edged with caution. He'd vouched for her exemption logs, but the chain's scrutiny demanded results, not just instinct. She rose, clipping Rex's lead with a quiet click, the dog's ears lifting as he sensed the shift. They moved out into the cooling night, the base's air crisp with the promise of autumn, carrying distant echoes of a K9 training whistle from the far fields. The forensics lot lay on the compound's edge, ringed by floodlights that hummed like distant generators. Specialist Kerr met them there, his coveralls smudged with grease, holding a sealed vial of fabric swatch from the truck's cab. "Handler," Kerr said, handing it over with gloved care. "Positive for solvent traces. Matches the masking agent on your chem strips. Dog's your best shot at linking it to Hale." Elena knelt, presenting the vial at Rex's level, her voice a steady murmur. "Rex, scent." The dog inhaled deeply, his nose pressing against the seal, memorizing the volatile profile in seconds, acrid petroleum laced with the bitter undernote of the organophosphate. He sat back, eyes locking on hers, tail giving a single affirmative thump against the gravel. They loaded into an unmarked SUV, Harlan at the wheel, the engine's rumble vibrating through the seats as they rolled toward the off-base dump site. The road wound through pine thickets, headlights cutting swaths through the darkness, the scent of damp earth seeping in through the vents. Elena kept Rex harnessed in the back, her hand resting on his head, feeling the subtle tension in his muscles. The moral coil from the board lingered. Restricted duty meant oversight, every command second-guessed, but this trace was her leverage, proof that defiance had forged a path to justice. At the site, a chain-link impound lot flanked by state trooper lights, the truck squatted like a discarded relic, its hood popped open under tech lamps. Rex bounded out, lead taut. pulling straight to the driver's door. His nose worked the hinges, the spilled coffee stain on the seat, the faint residue on the gearshift, barking sharply at the console where Hale's prints had lifted clean. Eleanor marked the alerts with swabs, her log entries precise, time-stamped, coordinates logged, Rex's responses unerring. "Positive chain!" She radioed back to base, voice level over the static. "Sent continuity from vial to cab. He's your man." Harlan nodded from the sidelines, his silhouette framed by the lot's wire as troopers coordinated with MPs. The confirmation rippled outward. Hale's last known, a motel off I-95, room paid in cash, abandoned at dawn. Intel vans mobilized, the hunt tightening like a noose. Back at HQ by midnight, the briefing room buzzed with restrained urgency. Colonel Reyes stood at the head, projector casting Hale's mugshot, a gaunt face with hollow eyes against the wall. Major Ellis sat to his left, notebook open, while the JAG officers observed from the rear. Elena entered with Rex, saluting as the room fell quiet, the dog's paws clicking softly on the linoleum. "Vasquez," Reyes said, gesturing her forward. "Your trace closed it. Hale apprehended 2 hours ago. Border stop, chem residue in his pack. Confessed to grudge, cut contract, blamed brass overreach. Targeted the K9 unit to hit training corps. Relief threaded the air, tempered by procedure." Harlan added, "Sergeant's input narrowed the radius. Rex's work." Reyes turned to Eleanor, his expression appraising. "The board reconvenes tomorrow. Your actions, deviation noted but outcome justifies. Recommend letter of commendation with protocol addendum, handler veto on sedation for certified baselines." Ellis cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "Agreed, sir. Rex's efficacy. It sets a model, but we standardize exemptions. Formal review quarterly." The words marked the shift. Scrutiny yielding to reform. Eleanor's conscience rippling through the ranks. Whispers from the unit had solidified. Tates vouching in the mess. Handlers petitioning for K9 autonomy logs. Outside, as they dispersed, the night air carried the faint bark of other dogs, echoing solidarity. In her quarters later, Eleanor reviewed the commendation draft under the bunk's dim lamp. Rex settled nearby from a temporary run. The paper's edges crisp, ink still fresh, symbolized the legacy. One defiance sparking quiet change, loyalty between handler and dog reinforcing the chain. But the cost lingered, a tremor in her hand as she folded it. The vulnerability of standing against order. Dawn would bring the formal close, the institution learning from the breach. Her moral courage etched into its evolving code. The next morning's assembly on the parade ground felt charged, the mist lifting to reveal ranks formed in precise lines, boots polished, uniforms aligned. Captain Harlan called Elena forward, Rex at heel, under Colonel Reyes's watchful eye. The unit stood at attention, the air humming with radio silence, the scent of fresh-cut grass rising from the earth. "Sergeant Vasquez," Harlan announced, voice carrying clear, "for actions exemplifying duty and instinct, you are awarded the Army Commendation Medal. Your bond with Rex preserved this unit." She saluted, the medal's weight settling on her chest, cool metal against fabric. Rex sat proud, tail steady, as applause broke the formation. Restrained, but genuine. Tate nodded from the ranks, shadow mirroring the posture. The reform memo circulated post-ceremony, updated K9 protocols, honoring the silent trust that outpaced rigid orders. In the quiet aftermath, as the platoon dispersed to drills, Elena knelt to Rex, her gloved hand tracing his ears. "We did it, partner." His eyes met hers, unwavering. The bond, a testament to conscience's quiet power. The sabotage's shadow lifted, but the legacy endured. Integrity weaving through hierarchy, transforming peril into precedent. If this story already has your respect, hit the like button. It helps the story of Elena Vasquez reach those who still believe in honor. The weeks following the commendation ceremony blurred into a rhythm of heightened vigilance and subtle shifts within the 82nd K9 unit. Elena Vasquez moved through her duties with the same measured precision, her boots echoing softly on the dew-damp paths of Fort Bragg as dawn patrols gave way to midday drills. Rex trotted at her side, his harness clipped secure, the walnut sheen of his coat catching the early light filtering through the pine canopy. The air carried the familiar tang of earth and distant diesel, but now laced with an undercurrent of change, handlers exchanging nods of quiet respect. Their leashes held a fraction looser during scent exercises. In the command tent, where maps still bore faint red traces of the reservoir breach, Colonel Reyes convened the quarterly protocol review. The canvas walls rustled gently in the breeze, the scent of fresh printed memos mingling with the steam from a communal coffee urn. Elena stood at parade rest, Rex sitting alert beside her. As Reyes addressed the assembled officers and handlers, Major Ellis flanked him, his wire-rimmed glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, a revised veterinary manual open on the table before them. "Gentlemen Sergeant," Reyes began, his voice steady and resonant, echoing the disciplined cadence of briefings past. "The Hale incident exposed vulnerabilities, not just in our waterlines, but in the balance between uniformity and instinct. Vasquez's actions, while testing the chain, underscored a truth. Our K9 partners are calibrated extensions of judgment, not variables to suppress." Ellis nodded, turning a page with deliberate care. "Updated directives, sir. Sedation protocols now include handler certification for exemptions, logged quarterly, with efficacy trials. Rex's baseline sets the standard, unsedated detection windows, prioritized in low-threat sims, escalating only under combat flags." Eleanor felt the weight of their gazes, the room's air thick with the hum of fluorescent bulbs and the faint scratch of pens on notepads. Her commendation medal hung beneath her fatigues, a subtle pressure against her chest, but it was Rex's steady presence that anchored her. The dog's ears pricked forward, sensing the room's subtle tensions without a whine. The reform wasn't grand. No sweeping decrees or public fanfare. It was procedural, etched into field manuals and training rotations, a quiet evolution born from one morning's defiance. Captain Harlan, seated to Reyes's right, met her eye with a brief nod. His broad shoulders relaxed for the first time in days. He'd mentored her through the board's scrutiny, vouching in closed sessions where doubts lingered like fog over the parade ground. "Implementation starts next cycle," he added, his tone clipped and mission-focused. "All handlers run baseline calibrations by end of month. Vasquez, you'll lead the first session, Rex as demo." The words carried endorsement, rippling through the group like a soft command. Corporal Tate, now positioned at the tent's rear with Shadow at heel, straightened imperceptibly, his earlier unease replaced by focused resolve. The unit's fracture had mended in the aftermath. Mess hall conversations shifting from resentment to case studies, handlers petitioning for their own exemptions based on K9 logs. Hale's confession, grudge-fueled sabotage, a bid to expose overreach in contracts, had been contained swiftly, his trial a footnote in classified reports. But the poisoned Shadow lingered in water purity checks and reinforced access logs, a reminder of threats born from within. As the meeting adjourned, Elena clipped Rex's lead and stepped into the afternoon sun, the warmth pressing through her uniform like a steady hand. The parade ground stretched before them, handlers dispersing to kennels where the air hummed with barks and the splash of rinse hoses on concrete. She knelt briefly, running a gloved hand along Rex's flank, feeling the even rise of his breathing. Their bond, forged in the silent hours of night watches and scent discrimination drills, had become the unit's unspoken emblem, loyalty not as blind obedience, but as the moral compass navigating rigid hierarchies. That evening, in the dim glow of the Intel annex, Elena reviewed the new protocols on a shared terminal, the screen's blue light casting shadows across her face. Harlan joined her, pouring 2 mugs from the ever-present thermos, the steam curling like morning mist. "You're a symbol now, Sergeant," he said quietly, handing her one. The coffee was black and bitter, grounding the moment in routine. Not just for the save, but for pushing the line without breaking it. Reyes mentioned mentorship, pair you with rookies on calibration runs. She accepted the mug, her fingers wrapping around its warmth, the ceramic steady against the faint tremor of reflection. "Sir, it's Rex who sensed it first. The system's learning to trust that." He chuckled softly, a rare sound in the annex's sterile quiet. "And you trusted him over the syringe. That's the lesson rippling up the chain. Conscience in the ranks, not just at the top." Outside, the base settled into twilight, patrol lights flickering on along the perimeter, the distant thump of a helicopter's rotors fading into the night. Elena walked Rex back to the kennels, the gravel crunching underfoot, the air cooling with the scent of pine resin and wet earth from a recent sprinkle. In the block's fluorescent haze, she settled him into his run, the gate clicking shut with a finality that echoed their shared trials. Rex nudged her hand through the bars, his brown eyes steady, a silent pact renewed. The transformation extended beyond her. Unit-wide, K9 handlers now logged instinct overrides in real time, tribunals weighing outcomes over strict adherence. Media inquiries at the gates had been deflected, routine drill anomaly. But within the wire, Elena's story circulated in hushed briefings, a case study in moral courage under scrutiny. The cost of integrity, the board's reprimand, the sidelong stares, had forged resilience, her vulnerability humanizing the discipline that bound them. As she returned to quarters, the single bulb overhead casting a warm pool on her bunk, Elena unfolded the commendation letter once more. The words blurred slightly in the fatigue, but their essence lingered, actions exemplifying duty, integrity, and the unyielding trust between soldier and partner. Rex's distant settle in the kennels carried through the walls, a rhythmic affirmation. In the rigid world of ranks and orders, her defiance had sparked reform, not revolution, but evolution, a legacy where conscience reinforced the chain, ensuring no threat went unsensed. The base's hum lulled her into sleep, the quiet breath of the night holding the promise of missions yet to come, where loyalty and justice intertwined, unbreakable. Subscribe for more stories of loyalty, courage, and justice within the ranks. Thank you for watching the case of They Tried to Sedate Her Dog Before Training, but the K9 sensed a poison hidden in the water supply. See you in the next one.